All right, everyone, welcome back. So glad to have you with us again. We're going to be diving into a pretty heavy topic today, the recent T-Mobile hack. And, yeah, it's a bit of a doozy.
It is, it is.
You sent over this RegTech Times article, Massive Breach, T-Mobile hacked in Chinese spy operation. And I got to say, it's got me thinking about how vulnerable we all are in this digital world.
Definitely. This one's definitely got some teeth.
So let's just jump right into it. This isn't just some random hacker in their mom's basement, right?
No, not at all. What we're looking at here is something much more organized, much more sophisticated.
Okay, so walk us through it. Who are these hackers and what were they after?
Well, the evidence suggests they're linked to Chinese intelligence agencies. And their goal, it appears to be espionage. They were trying to monitor communications, gather intelligence, basically, get their hands on anything that could give them a strategic advantage.
So high-value targets then.
Exactly. Government officials, people in sensitive industries, anyone whose conversations could hold, valuable information.
And the thing is, it's not just T-Mobile. The article mentions they hit other telecom companies too. Verizon, AT&T. It's like they were on a rampage through the whole industry.
Yeah, and that's what makes it so concerning. This wasn't just a one-off attack. It was a coordinated campaign targeting telecom networks worldwide.
So they were casting a really wide net then. T-Mobile is saying no customer data was compromised, but they're being really quiet about whether any actual communication data was taken. What's your take on that?
Honestly, it's hard to say without more transparency from T-Mobile, but it does raise some red flags. Are they just trying to downplay the severity? We need more information.
And then there's this whole other layer of concern, the fact that these hackers got into systems used by the government for wiretapping. I mean, that's some serious stuff.
No kidding. Those systems are supposed to be top secret, used for national security purposes, and now, potentially, they've been compromised. That could have huge implications for ongoing investigations, legal proceedings, the whole works.
It's like they've tapped into the nervous system of law enforcement. And who knows what they could do with that access. And as you might expect, China's denying any involvement, right?
Of course. That's pretty standard in these situations. Attributing cyber attacks, especially when you're talking about state-sponsored actors, is incredibly difficult. There are always layers of obfuscation, denials, and misdirection.
So we're left with a lot of unknowns. We know there was a breach, we know it was sophisticated, and we know sensitive systems were accessed. But the true extent of the damage, that's still a big question mark.
Yeah, and that's the thing about these types of attacks. The full impact might not be immediately obvious. It could take weeks, months, maybe even years to really uncover the true extent of what was compromised and how that information might be used.
That's a pretty unsettling thought. I mean, if these guys can breach systems designed for national security, what does that mean for the average person? It makes you feel kind of exposed, doesn't it?
It definitely raises some concerns. We tend to think of these big telecom companies as having impenetrable security, but this shows that even with vast resources and sophisticated defenses, they can still be targeted.
So where do we go from here? What's the next step in trying to understand this breach and its implications?
Well, I think digging into who these attackers are is a good place to start. The RegTech Times article mentions a group called Salt Typhoon. They've been linked to several high-profile cyber espionage campaigns.
So are we talking about a specific unit within Chinese intelligence? What do we know about them?
Not a lot of concrete details, unfortunately, but what we do know is that Salt Typhoon is considered highly skilled, well-resourced, and has been operating for quite some time. Their targets, they run the gamut from government agencies and defense contractors to, as we see now, telecom companies.
So it's safe to say they're not just after any data. They're specifically seeking information with intelligence value.
Yeah. Right. They're looking for insights into political strategies, military capabilities, technological advancements, anything that could give them an edge.
It's a scary thought that our personal communications could be caught in the crossfire of this digital espionage war.
Yeah.
I mean, how can we even protect ourselves if these attacks are so hard to detect?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. But before we get into that, I think it's worth taking a closer look at how they pulled this off. I mean, these systems are designed to be incredibly secure. How did they manage to breach them?
Exactly. Let's dig into that.
Well, it seems they used a combination of advanced techniques, possibly zero-day exploits. Those are software vulnerabilities that are unknown to the developer, so there's no patch yet, and stealthy malware designed to slip past traditional security measures.
So they basically had skeleton keys to the back doors of these systems, and nobody even knew those doors existed.
Pretty much. This level of sophistication requires serious expertise and resources, which again points to a well-funded and organized operation.
This is starting to sound like something straight out of a spy movie. And honestly, it's both fascinating and terrifying at the same time.
It definitely blurs the lines between fiction and reality.
Okay, so we've got a handle on the who and the how. Now let's talk about the what. What kind of damage could they potentially inflict with this level of access? This is where things get really interesting, right?
Oh, absolutely. That's a whole other can of worms.
Well, I'm ready to open that can. I guess we'll have to save that for part 2 of this deep dive. Okay, so that can of worms you mentioned. Let's open it up. What kind of damage are we talking about here? What can these hackers actually do with the access they've gained?
Well, remember those systems used for court-approved wiretapping?
Yeah, the ones we were talking about before the break. Super sensitive stuff.
Right. Well, think about the information on those systems. It could give them insights into ongoing investigations, maybe even national security operations.
Oh, wow. So we're talking about potentially jeopardizing active cases, yep, blowing the cover of informants.
Possibly, yeah. I mean, this information could be used to tip off targets, disrupt investigations, maybe even manipulate legal proceedings. It's pretty serious.
It's kind of like they've got their finger on the pulse of law enforcement now, and they can manipulate it however they want.
It's not a good situation, that's for sure. And it just goes to show how crucial cybersecurity is in this day and age. Everything's connected, and when one part of the system is compromised, it can have ripple effects throughout the whole thing.
Absolutely. And this is just one example. Who knows what else they've been able to access and what they might do with that information. If they can get into systems designed for national security, what does that mean for the average person?
It's a question we all need to be asking. I mean, what can we do to protect ourselves when it seems like no system is truly impenetrable?
Yeah, it's a bit unsettling, to say the least. Okay, so we've talked about the potential damage, but how did they even pull this off in the first place? These systems are supposed to be incredibly secure.
Right, so remember we were talking about zero-day exploits and stealthy malware?
Yeah, those skeleton keys to the back doors.
Right. Well, it looks like they were able to exploit vulnerabilities in T-Mobile's network infrastructure. Those vulnerabilities could have been in their software, their configurations, or even third-party apps with access to their systems.
So they basically found a weak spot, a crack in the armor, and they were able to slip in.
Exactly. And once they had that foothold, they were able to move laterally within the network, accessing other systems and data.
So one compromise leads to another, and before you know it, they're deep inside the system with access to all sorts of sensitive information.
Yeah, it can happen really fast, and it can be incredibly difficult to detect until it's too late.
Okay, so what are the key takeaways here? I mean, what can we learn from this whole T-Mobile debacle?
I think the biggest lesson is that no one is immune to these kinds of attacks.
So complacency is not an option.
Exactly. Whether you're a huge corporation or just an individual user, you need to be proactive about cybersecurity. You need to be aware of the risks and take steps to protect yourself.
Okay, so let's talk about those steps. What can individuals and organizations do to improve their security posture?
For individuals, it starts with the basics. Strong passwords, two-factor authentication, and be cautious about what you click on, what you download. Don't just open attachments from people you don't know.
Right, basic digital hygiene.
Yeah.
But what about organizations? What can they do?
Well, they need a more comprehensive approach. Robust firewalls, intrusion detection systems, antivirus software, those are all crucial. But they also need to prioritize employee training.
Because humans are often the weakest link. Right?
Exactly. A lot of these attacks exploit human vulnerabilities through things like phishing scams and social engineering, so education is key.
It's like a never-ending battle, isn't it? As soon as you patch one hole, another one pops up.
It is. It's a constant back and forth between the attackers and the defenders. But we can't give up. We need to keep innovating, keep learning, and keep working together.
You mentioned earlier that attributing these attacks can be really tough. So how do we hold these hackers accountable if we can't even say for sure who they are?
It's a major challenge, and honestly, it requires a global effort. We need international cooperation to establish some ground rules for cyberspace, and to develop ways to attribute attacks and hold people accountable regardless of where they're operating from.
So it's like we need a global cyber police force.
Kind of, yeah. We need a coordinated effort to investigate these crimes, share intel, and enforce the law in the digital world.
Okay, so let's shift gears for a moment and talk about something we haven't really touched on yet, the psychological impact of these attacks. I mean, it's one thing to think about the data that's been compromised, but it's another to consider the emotional toll it takes on people.
Yeah, that's an important point. We often focus on the technical aspects, but the human element is crucial too.
Exactly. It's that feeling of vulnerability, that loss of control that can be really unsettling.
It can really shake your sense of security. Like, if this can happen to a massive company like T-Mobile, what does that mean for me?
Right. And it makes you question everything. Who can you trust? What's safe? How can you protect yourself when it seems like everything is connected and potentially vulnerable?
That's a question a lot of people are grappling with right now, and it's not an easy one to answer.
So where do we go from here? How do we deal with that psychological impact? How do we rebuild trust in a world where it feels like everything is hackable?
Well, that's something we'll explore further in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we're back, and I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on this whole psychological impact thing. How do we cope with feeling so vulnerable in this hyper-connected world?
Yeah, it's tough. It's like you think you're safe, you're doing everything right, and then bam, something like this happens, and it just throws you for a loop.
It really does. It's that feeling of, like, violation, like someone's been snooping around in your private life.
Absolutely. And it makes you question everything. Like, can I trust any system? Is anything truly secure? It can be really unsettling.
It is.
Yeah.
So how do we deal with that? I mean, we can't just unplug from the digital world completely, right?
No, no, that's not realistic. And honestly, it's not necessary. The key is to find that balance. Embrace the benefits of technology, but be smart about it, be aware of the risks, and take steps to mitigate them.
So it's about being proactive, not paranoid.
Exactly. Knowledge is power. The more you understand about the threats, the better equipped you'll be to deal with them, both practically and emotionally.
Okay, so let's talk about those practical steps. We've already covered things like strong passwords and two-factor authentication, but what else can we do?
Well, one thing I always recommend is being mindful of your digital footprint. Think about what you're sharing online, where you're sharing it.
So being careful about what we post on social media, what websites we visit.
Yeah, exactly. And don't just blindly click accept on every cookie policy or privacy agreement that pops up. Take a minute to read them, understand what data you're sharing.
And what about staying informed about the latest threats? How do we keep up with all that?
There are some great resources out there. Government agencies like CISA, reputable security companies, they all provide updates on the latest vulnerabilities, scams, best practices.
So it's kind of like checking the weather forecast for the digital world.
Yeah, exactly. You want to know what storms are brewing so you can prepare.
And if, despite our best efforts, what should we do?
Well, first things first, don't panic. I know it's scary, but there are things you can do. Change your passwords immediately, contact your bank or credit card company if you think there might be any fraudulent activity, and of course, report the incident to the authorities.
So take action, but don't freak out.
Right, and remember, it's not your fault. These attackers are getting more and more sophisticated all the time.
That's reassuring. But what about the psychological impact? How do we recover from that? How do we rebuild trust and feel safe again?
It takes time, but it is possible. Focus on what you can control. Take those practical steps we talked about. Educate yourself. Connect with others who've been through similar experiences. There's a lot of support out there.
So we're not alone in this.
Absolutely not. And remember, cybersecurity is an ongoing process. It's a journey, not a destination. We need to keep learning, keep adapting.
Well, this has been an incredibly eye-opening conversation. Thank you for sharing your expertise and insights with us. I feel like I've learned a lot, and I'm definitely going to be more proactive about my own digital security.
I'm glad to hear that. And remember, knowledge is power.
Absolutely. And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it informative and helpful. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and stay safe out there. This has been The Deep Dive, and we'll catch you next time.